While the Buddhist protests threatened to undermine the government in Saigon in 1963, in the countryside the armed forces of South Vietnam were pushing the Viet-Cong back, and the strategic hamlet policy continued to expand, further isolating the communists. This channel's mission is to challenge the Vietnam orthodoxy through reference to primary sources. Much of what you know about the Vietnam War is either incomplete or false. Please consider supporting this channel and its mission through Patreon. The link is in the description. Through the spring and summer of 1963, the South Vietnamese government continued to improve its counterinsurgency capabilities. The regular armed services reached a strength of 215,000, the Civil Guard 75,000, the Self-Defense Corps 100,000, and the Civilian Irregular Defense Groups 40,000. The government forces sought battle with the Viet-Cong and inflicted many defeats on them. Colonel Bryce F. Deno, 1st Corps Senior Advisor in July 1963, reported that the ARVN is reaching out into the deep jungle to attack Viet-Cong secure areas, while 3 Corps Senior Advisor Colonel Wilbur Wilson stated that the pacification efforts had made substantial gains in every province of his core area. In Han Hoa Province, the ARVN 23rd Division had been broken down into small units and was patrolling the mountains to the west, and the 25th Division had pushed the VC from the coastal plains of Quang Ngai Province, a hotbed of communist activity, and into the Annamite Mountains, while also working with the strategic hamlet militia to repulse large VC attacks on the hamlets in April, inflicting several hundred casualties. The Special Assistant for Counterinsurgency for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Major General Victor H. Krulak, remarked that offensive operations against the Viet-Cong are widespread and varied, and are growing steadily in intensity. The strategic hamlet program continued to expand. Phase 1 of the national campaign, the implementation of 2/3 of the program, was completed ahead of schedule in mid-1963. A large number were operating effectively, though some were only partially complete. US officers that visited each of the provinces observed that local governments had undergone dramatic improvement, and that the population of the countryside had much greater confidence in the government. Ted Sarong, head of the Australian training mission, told Washington officials in May that the strategic hamlet program was a big success story. And Sir Robert Thompson, head of the British advisory mission, stated that the government was winning the war and might block the VC's access to the people by the middle of 1964. The exception was in the Mekong Delta where, according to Rufus Phillips, chief US advisor to the strategic hamlet program, except in a few provinces, the apparent progress is largely illusory. But it was an otherwise positive report, noting that the program has so well proven itself in those areas where it has been well executed that there is every reason for optimism and confidence. It should be noted that these observations did not come solely from South Vietnamese statistics. The official total greatly exceeded the actual number of completed hamlets, but also from personal hamlet inspections, conversations with villagers and government employees, and captured documents from Viet-Cong defectors. The aggressiveness and effectiveness of South Vietnamese forces in the Mekong Delta increased during the middle of 1963. In late July, the ARVN 7th Division engaged 2 companies from the 514th Viet-Cong Battalion with a large task force. The companies were heavily entrenched in 2 strong points, defended by heavy machine guns and surrounded by open rice paddies. The 7th had encountered the 514th previously attacked back, suffering a heavy defeat, and the conditions were similar. But this time, after 2 hours of battle, the Viet-Cong positions were overrun, and the survivors were forced to flee through escape tunnels. 58 bodies were recovered, and many more were suspected to have been carried off by the retreating VC, while 18 ARVN soldiers were lost and 45 wounded. An American advisor remarked to the press, "Everything they did wrong at that back, they did right Saturday." A communist report stated that the government's grinding efforts to establish strategic hamlets and separate the people from the communists had caused them great manpower and material difficulties, and that government forces had launched successful operations deep into communist base areas, destroying communist forces and their lines of communication. And in the Mekong Delta, communist guerrillas in Benche province that had lived among the people were driven out, and could only conduct low-level operations while evading government forces. But elsewhere in the Delta, the situation had reached stalemate. The press also acknowledged government success. In an article dated July 28, 1963, David Halberstam reported in the New York Times that outside the Delta the war was going well, and he went on to conclude that the government had made substantial progress. However, infiltration of men and material from the north continued, which offset Viet-Cong combat losses and desertions in the south. Chinese heavy weapons were also appearing across the country, carried overland through Laos and Cambodia, or by sea directly to South Vietnam. Much progress had been made by the government and armed forces of South Vietnam, but much work remained if the war was to be concluded in 1965.